Hey, Gabby, thank you so much for joining me today. And thank you to all who are joining us live on LinkedIn. As always, we invite you to join us in the comments. Like, this is a great opportunity as we live and work in a distributed environment to get to know one another outside of our own company walls. And so I invite you to do this because this is a topic that no matter where you're working from today, matters greatly, both to our generation and also the generation coming up before us. So this past week, the Upwork Research Institute released a brand new report in partnership with Workplace Intelligence. Dan Schwabel and Rebecca Scott have been great partners to us. And we really seem to have struck a nerve in the market. So this was a report that we wrote really trying to understand AI and productivity in the workplace. And it's driven over 35 different media outlets and headlines. And so Gabby and I had this idea literally last week. We were talking in a Upwork Chicago office and said, how cool would this be as researchers to actually give you a director's cut? We see movie producers do this all the time. And those of you who are joining us who do applied research, you know that what actually ends up in the actual report is maybe half of what we actually uncovered and discovered. And so there's two things we want to do today. One, we wanted to share with you a behind the scenes look of the intent of the research, the methodology, and some of the findings that we find as researchers most interesting. And then the second thing I want to do today, too, with Gabby is begin to humanize who we are at the Upwork Research Institute. We're really excited about our upcoming research, and we want to begin to invite you in a human dialogue. I think there's much more humanity that's needed in business research, and that's part of what we want to do today. And so, Gabby, I'd love to turn it over to you just to introduce yourself and share with us a little bit about the intent of the research and really the methodology that went into this data.
Yeah, thank you, Kelly, for inviting me to this awesome session. And thanks to all of you for joining us today. My name is Gabby Berlaku. I'm a senior manager at the Upwork Research Institute. And with this research, Upwork has been really carefully tracking the AI and work conversation. And we're seeing a lot out there that's super promising that AI equals productivity across your workforce. But at the same time, we're also seeing a lot out there that indicates that the workforce is kind of going through some angst, right? Like, how many articles have you seen suggesting that burnout is at an all-time high, disengagement is high, people's mental health is suffering? And so if both realities are true, it must be a really strange time to be a worker, and the work experience must be really fragmented and kind of strange. So we wanted to better understand that. What does it feel like to be a worker today? And do leaders see it? So we had a sample of 1,250 CXOs, 1,250 workers. These are both full-time traditional contract employees and sort of non-traditional employees like freelancers. And this was cross industries, cross company sizes. This was collected in the US, UK, Canada, and Australia. So we cast a wide net to really try to understand what's going on when it comes to AI and productivity at work.
I love that, Gabby. And those of you who are listening, CXOs too, that's what we usually define as researchers as part of the C-suite. So we really want to understand leaders. And I think, Gabby, what you just mentioned too, I think is really unique to this study. Again, we're at Upwork, so we really want to understand the freelancer and alternative talent model. But I think that's growing, and that's part of the future of work. And the majority of studies that are conducted today really only focus on the full-time employee model. And so again, if you're joining us, you work with freelancers, you are a freelancer, let us know what you think of this study in the chat, because I do think that's also one of the underpinnings that make this study unique. And so, Gabby, if you're up for this format, I think what we should do today, because I know our social team is always putting us pressure to keep things concise and short. So what we'll try to do is spend a couple blocks and try to time box them to 3 minutes each, give or take, and really start to do a bit of a round robin between you and I on the study itself. So how does that sound today?
Oh, yes.
Okay. First block, context. Context matters. So I'll take this first one and then turn to read the second one. So the first thing that I think is important that I want to talk about today is why context matters to when generative AI was introduced. So oftentimes I think, and again, if we have IO psychologists, I'd be curious to get their opinion on this. I think we over-rotate on individual decision-making and the individual personality. And we do this a lot, like with our leaders, and trying to understand why they're incorporating the technology the way they are. When in reality, oftentimes what I believe as an organizational behaviorist is that our environment is often dictating and really being that invisible hand behind the scenes of how we even have a mindset and approach this new technology. So let's just take a big step back, maybe a collective sigh as a group of people to recognize what really has happened over the last 3 to 4 years. So First things first, I mean, how many of us have seen headlines? Are we in a recession? Are we not in a recession? There has been tremendous economic uncertainty and turbulence in a way that we haven't necessarily seen before. Most times, economies go through ebbs and flows and they follow a rhythm. We've entered into a really unusual situation where a lot of the economic data doesn't quite make sense of what's happening. And I think what's happening is business leaders are constantly embracing for this economic downturn. And you saw that with some of the messaging from big companies really declaring like an entire year, the year of efficiency. And I'm again curious to those of you who are joining us, how many of you have felt like you are having to do more with less over the last several years? The second thing that we have to acknowledge that I know it feels like old news, but is the pandemic itself. The pandemic was a game changer for businesses in a way that I don't think many of us have really quite processed and realized. First things first, the supply chain got completely disrupted, and we saw a lot of vulnerabilities in the way that we actually move goods and services across industries, across country lines. And so I think that has really shook leaders in businesses, seeing that fragility that's within our system. The second thing that has completely changed is our customer habits, like the way that we're spending our money and the way that we're behaving with companies and brands has completely changed from the pandemic. It wasn't just a short-term blip. These have been systematic long-term changes in what we expect from really a digital commerce perspective to be delivered. And then obviously, we're doing this in a remote environment. The other thing that shifted is remote work. And so really for many of us, we're not working remote before the pandemic. We got accelerated into that. And then we've had a lot of start and stops with RTO, hybrid work. Are we coming back to the office? Are we not? And so there's been like just a lot of uncertainty, even from a leader's perspective of like, what is our go forward strategy of where we decide to work? And so against that backdrop is when, November 2022, the shiny object appeared. And I think what happened, from my perspective, is leaders are grasping onto this and saying, this is going to be the lever we desperately need right now because we're trying to pull all things in every which way and it's trying and things aren't working as fast as they need to. And oh, by the way, inflation's up and the cash that I had pre-pandemic on my balance sheet is now worth a lot less. And so my dollar's not going as far. And so I think this is why we see this hyper efficiency and productivity mindset around ChatGPT or any sort of, whether it's Microsoft Copilot, whatever your name your generative AI tool. But I think it's the mindset of efficiency that we approach this. And I think that's the real root problem here and what's causing the concern. So in case you didn't read the report, 81% of global executives have admitted to us in our survey that they have indeed increased demands on their workforce. So if you're feeling it, your leaders recognize it, and we saw across the board almost unanimously that leaders recognize this. But I have to say, I'm going to end on this, Gabby, before turning it to you for the next segment, is people are feeling it. Like the level of burnout that we saw, like, yes, it's a data point, 71% of people being reported feeling burned out, but like it just as a human, like that also just hurts my heart because it's like I feel that it's more than just a data point. I think we all work in an environment where we sense burnout. And when we're burned out, we know we're not bringing our full humanity to work. Like we know that is not where we're at our best. And I think that to me as a researcher is like, how do we actually begin to help solve that? Because yes, AI is a really exciting tool, but I'm not quite sure if we're using it for pure efficiency. That's going to help that root problem that we found that people are just overworked and burned out. So time box that. Gabby, tell me second topic here. We kind of thought generative AI to the rescue, teed it up a little bit in my response, but can you tell us a little bit more about your thoughts on whether generative AI is really here to the rescue and what we found in the data?
Yeah, well, first of all, great job illustrating kind of the context. Like I'm feeling it, that pressure as you outline like all of the things that both business
Yes.
leaders and workers are facing. Um, about once a week, I will hear from someone, and I'm curious how many on the call feel the same. Gad, I'm so sick of talking about AI. Why do we keep talking about AI? And I'm going to tell you right now, the reason we keep talking about it is because business leaders are very, very interested in it. So in our research, we found that 96% of business leaders, that's those CXOs, are saying they anticipate positive productivity gains to their workforce as a direct result of AI. And so, what is behind this optimism? I think that media and research are partly to blame a little bit because when you think about some of that early research that came out after the launch of ChatGPT, we were seeing things like call service agents can experience a 14% rise in productivity. And we were seeing quite a bit of research around how this really boosts the performance levels of low performers, and it helps them kind of mimic the performance and creativity levels of high performers. So if you're a business leader and you're trying to drive productivity in this swirling, chaotic world and your people are burned out, it is very seductive to sort of think, now, wait a minute, here comes a solution that's going to take some of this burden on. It's going to take some of this work. It's going to lift performance levels. And so they're all really, really sort of bullish about bringing this into their workforces. What we saw in our sample is that 39% of companies are already mandating the use of AI tools. An additional 46% aren't mandating, but they're bringing the tools, they're making them available, and they're encouraging their use. So this is a lot of companies. And the pressure is on because half of business leaders are already saying, we're behind our competitors. We've got to get up to speed with AI. So what's interesting in this context that you mentioned of rising demands on people. So demands are a very well-studied phenomenon in organizational psychology. And there's a theory, job demands resources theory, that says you just can't keep increasing demands. You have to also provide resources to help people get their work done and help them feel good about it. And I think what our research is showing is that leaders believe that they've given employees a resource with generative AI, but what workers are seeing is that they've been given another demand, because we see that 77% of workers are saying generative AI is actually added to my workload because all of a sudden I have to hear about it a bunch. I have to learn what it is and I have to use it. I have to maybe review output in ways that I didn't have to before. And my boss expects me to take on more work because they believe that this is driving so much efficiency that I've got more time. And so what we're really seeing is not so much a resource that is helping workers, at least in the ways that it's being implemented and used in companies today, but rather a demand, an additional thing on their plate that's really helping to fuel this burnout.
Gabby, I think it's so brilliant. So I'm going to say the spicy thing as opposed to put you on the spot. As you were talking, first of all, I love that you're bringing in just the literature and a framework for us to help frame this. Because to your point, everything that we view as a worker is this a resource? Is this going to help me? Or is this an actual demand and something I have to learn and add burden to my workload? And so something you said I think is so wise is that I do think leaders, I think you call it like a seductive lever or pull to help, they think this is going to be a resource, but in reality, it's being perceived as a demand and burden. And I almost wonder if that's signaling. There's a question here that someone asked that again, I think is pretty a profound question is like, is it just burnout or is it something more systematic at this point? Like, is there something more holistic going on in the workplace? So I'm going to say the spicy take and say yes. I think we
Mhm.
have a crisis of leadership and the way that we relate to one another in the workplace. And I think that's what we've lost. It's not like everyone wants to blame remote work or we want to blame technology or this or that. But the reality is, I think our capacity for human beings and being able to relate to one another and display acts of kindness, to have joy, to have empathy, those are a lost art. Are those the words that we'd use to describe leaders today within organizations? And I think that is what this signals to me a bit is we leadership needs to be the resource and the support system here. And if you're offering yourself and offering the skills and training to go alongside this new demand of this technology, I don't think we're going to see the results that we have. But I don't know. I'm just going to give you a quick second. Do you agree with that, or do you think I'm a little off my leadership field?
I totally agree. I think we are layering something like AI, insert shiny object here, on top of outdated systems of work. And that is part of why
Yeah.
we're seeing this. And I know, I imagine the rest of our discussion will center on that. But I absolutely agree. It is systemic. It is not just a day-to-day, quick fix.
Yeah. So, Gabby, I want to ask you this question. Who do you think is the most at risk? We got different slices within the data, different populations. What's your view here after looking at this data set? Who's most at risk for feeling overwhelmed by AI today?
Gosh, it's so interesting because we did have quite a bit of data to kind of dig in, and not all of it made it into the report, as you mentioned. So the first thing I think that is risky is companies that have very traditional models of talent where they maybe don't have the infrastructure or the policies or the desire to leverage non-traditional sources of talent. And I know we're Upwork, so I'm going to try to not be on my soapbox too much about this, but non-traditional sources of talent do include things like freelancers, do include things like managed services and working kind of beyond the boundaries of that traditional full-time employment contract. And we actually found that this was a bigger problem when organizations are larger. So when organizations are smaller,
Mm,
they have kind of like that built-in agility and ability to quickly pivot. But the larger an organization is, the less that they have that. And so I think leveraging non-traditional talent pools is kind of like a cheat code for helping them be more agile. When large companies fail to leverage that cheat code, that's where employees were really feeling the added pressure of having AI kind of heaped onto their plates. So that's one. Um, Another kind of interesting finding, and this is going to hit home for a lot of us. When you work in an organization where the 30,000-foot kind of view of workforce skills, so that's what skills do workers have, what skills are needed, where are the gaps, when that view is murky, the employees are going to feel the pressure a little bit more. And so I know the reason I say a lot of us are going to feel that is because in this current stage of a shift to skills-based talent management, something we've been hearing a lot about, many of us continue to work in organizations where that view remains murky. So the reason that matters here is because if you don't have a really clear view of what skills your workers have and what skills are needed, it's going to be really hard to inform sort of a clear strategic strategy around what is AI being brought in to do? What is it supplementing? What are workers then solely responsible for? If you are leveraging non-traditional talent, what are they being brought in to do? Like, how do the pieces of the puzzle fit together? If you don't really have like the language of skills and the view of skills, you're not able to craft that strategy and you're not able to articulate that strategy. So, one of the things we
mm,
saw, and this is my favorite finding of the report, 47% of workers say they have no idea how to achieve their organization's goals around productivity when it comes to AI. So, this is not they're fuzzy on it. This is not they're neutral about it. This is they have no idea how to do this. And so I think what's behind that is a failure to create a clear strategy or a failure to articulate a clear strategy, or more likely both.
mm. I love that. I think those are so fast, especially like the large organization, like that resonates too for, kind of some of the companies I've been at. It is hard to be agile. And like, I so agree with you in your last point. A strategy is so critical. And like, there's so many people today who don't even know, like, there's other research that's out there that shows the majority of American workers today don't even know like the purpose of their organization and like what their mission actually is and why they're doing what they're doing. And we've just layered on another technology, I think, again, like within that context environment, and people really don't know like what is the business problem I'm solving for. So I think that's one of the challenges too, is how do we move this to business problem mode. So I know it's just amazing how fast time goes. So Gabby, we are already almost at time, and I promised people we would finish this up by the time it takes them to finish a cup of coffee. So if we can round robin here at the very end, I'll have you go first. What was the biggest surprise for you as a researcher looking at this report?
Mm. Um, I don't know if it was a surprise, but it just
Okay.
drove home for me something that I already thought and I saw supported in this data. So I see a question in our chat about what is outdated. And I think one of the things that we see a lot is a very transactional view of work where it's like workers work, I as a company pay, end of story. And so I have this prediction about the future, and it's a really nice prediction that eventually leaders are going to, as the economy kind of gets on more solid footing, leaders are going to A, recognize the demands they've placed on people. Our data suggests they already do. And B, they are going to reward their high performers for those increased demands. We're going to see raises, we're going to see promotions, and that's great. And I hope it does happen. But I'm suggesting that it's actually not enough, because I think what
Mm,
it's doing is really kind of perpetuating and continuing to cultivate this outdated sort of transactional view of you've done more work, you will see more money. And so a data point that I love that was on the cutting room floor of this report was that 24% of our freelancers said there is no amount of money that could get them to consider a full-time employment contract. And that's because the other aspects of their work experience, so their ability to kind of have some control over what kind of work they do, their ability to hone their expertise, their ability to build a broad set of relationships, those things were too important to them, more important to them than any amount of money. And so I think what this suggests to me is that what we're probably going to do is reward monetarily people who survived in this system. But what we really should be also doing is thinking about how to infuse kind of a sense of purpose and meaning and relationship building
Mm.
in people's work, because I think that's really the preventative antidote to burnout long term, not necessarily more pay and not necessarily more AI.
Amen to that. I mean, human connection and human community is the answer to burnout here. And obviously, yes, people need to have equitable wages, fair wages. We have to get that transactional part right, but that transactional element alone is not enough. So that is brilliantly said. And I love that data point too that did make the report. And the 24% of freelancers just saying there's no money enough, that that trade-off cost is too great for me to leave this lifestyle. I think for me, what I'll share here in kind of our last minute or two, what's something that might not have been super clear in the report that I found most interesting as a researcher, because again, like I think performance management is part of the problem we have here. Again, coming from organizational behavior, what you tend to pay and measure tends to dictate how people actually behave within your organization, And so for so often, majority of us are working within a system that has very individualistic metrics of performance. And part of that means that we found within our research is that people who are struggling the most with burnout. So, like, I remember, Gabby, you ran this analysis. And again, it was just this group of people who are really struggling within the data set across all industries, across the globe. And what we found is, and something that I think was statistically significant was how they were being measured for performance. If their number one performance metric was against speed and efficiency, that seemed to have a correlation to some degree with this group that was feeling the most burned out. And so I just think, again, like as a leader, as we think through, I think this is a great opportunity for us to think about, especially with a tool like AI, where it's going to require us to all learn together, as opposed to telling people work faster, work more efficient with this tool. Tell me what the time savings or cost savings you have. I would so much rather the dialogue to be around. Tell me what you've learned. How are you using it for ideation and brainstorming? What sort of scaling are you doing? How are you bringing in outsiders like freelancers coming in to help you upskill? What can we learn from this? And I think that could be a game changer for alleviating some of this burnout. So,
Absolutely.
Gabby, 30 seconds or less. What's the one thing? Let's get practical. I mean, I know we can have philosophical conversations for hours, but what's the one thing, you're a business leader, you're a worker today, what's the one thing that you'd say to people today?
Uh, it rhymes with AI. Start with why.
I
Really
love
think
it.
through what it's being brought in to do and co-create that why with your people. Understand, and to your point, I think, some of our performance metric systems have been set up by people that don't know the job intimately. And that's part of why we see, people evaluated against things like speed and efficiency instead of things like contributions to strategy and their ability to be creative and innovate. So really bring people in and help determine that why before you're forcing this technology on people.
Okay, Gabby, you just dropped a mic on me there. I didn't even know that was going to be your answer. That was awesome. I love it. Hopefully, everyone is writing that down. That's something easy to remember. For me, my quick thing that I'm going to leave people with is, again, kind of what I alluded to at the most surprising finding is think about AI, generative AI in particular, as a learning tool, not just an efficiency tool, and really begin to think about how can I use this to learn. And this is a personal coach that you essentially have at the palm of your fingers. Now use it with caution. It's still very much a frontier model and, at times about 80% correct. So human judgment is always wise and needed. But I do think let's move away from just thinking this as a cost saving and time savings and much more into how, again, as humans, we can learn and develop. So with that, Gabby, much gratitude for you. I appreciate this was like a last minute idea. Thank you to all of us who have joined. I see comments are coming in, questions are coming in. Gabby and I wanted to stay just in dialogue mode. So we'll go ahead and now turn our attention to the comments after we drop. And again, I just really want to say a big thank you to our partners at Workplace Intelligence. Dan and team have been absolutely incredible. So make sure you give their newsletter a follow. Really excited for that partnership and just a lot of gratitude for the work we did together. Thank you all for being here. Let's continue to bring humanity to the forefront and have fun.